Picture this. You've spent hours, maybe even days editing your project. You've colored it, you've mixed your audio, and now you're on the final step of opening the Deliver page, and you're stuck, terrified of clicking the wrong button and ruining all your hard work. In this video, I'm going to help you understand the Deliver page so you can export the right file for the right platform every single time with total confidence. We'll walk through the different settings and sections. You'll learn how to create presets for the exports you always create, and you'll learn a ton of helpful tips and tricks along the way. I know the Deliver page might look complex, but it's actually 3 simple sections. On the far left, you have your render settings. This is your command center. It's where you choose things like your format, your codec, and your resolution. In the middle, you have your viewer and your timeline. This is where you see what you're exporting, whether that's the whole timeline or just a small section of it. On the far right, you have the render queue. This is your list of all the exports you've got prepared. You can set up one or multiple exports, say one for YouTube and one for your archive, and then Resolve will process them one after another. And that's it. It's not that scary. The Deliver page is built for everyone, from a YouTuber to a major Hollywood studio. And that means there's stuff in here that you'll likely never ever touch. See this button labeled tape? This is for outputting your project to a physical video tape deck. Unless you're working in a broadcast facility that still uses tape, you're probably never going to touch this. Plus, I couldn't show you how it works, even if I wanted to, because I don't have a tape deck connected to my machine, so all I get is this error message. Let's start working through the render settings. Here at the very top, you have a list of presets that Resolve comes with. Clicking on any of these will make changes to the settings below that you can tweak as needed. We have H.264 and H.265 master. These are presets for exporting your file as one of those codecs. They default to QuickTime as the format, which will give you an MOV file, but you can change that to something else like an MP4 or any of the other options that support these codecs. The one in between them is for Blackmagic HyperDeck recorders or playback devices like the HyperDeck Studio line. You would use it when you're exporting a file to load into a HyperDeck for playback in a live or broadcast workflow. So for instance, queuing up pre-recorded segments on set or in a control room. There is a ProRes preset, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then we have presets for YouTube, Vimeo, and TikTok. They have an option to automatically upload directly to the platform you selected once the export is done. You'll need to sign into the account for that platform first. You can do that by heading to Preferences, System, Internet Accounts, and pick the appropriate platform. With that said, I never use these options because they don't give you any control over the quality of the file that you're creating. You see, when you upload a video to YouTube, it doesn't just play the file that you sent them. It re-encodes it to create all of the different sizes that you've got access to under the viewer settings. I would rather create my own preset that gives them a much higher quality file than they ask for, so that when they make all of their different files from it, they've got a much better place to start from. Now, we're going to get into making your own presets once I'm done showing you around. There are a few more platforms you can upload your video to that are helpful for client review, like Blackmagic Presentations or Dropbox Replay. And they work in the same way in terms of signing into your account and letting you upload directly if you want. This IMF preset is a studio-only feature and has options for a few different streaming platforms. The Final Cut and Premiere Pro presets are for round-tripping back to those programs after you've done color or visual effects work in Resolve. They create individual pieces of media for each clip in the timeline, along with an XML file so you can rebuild the edit in the other platform. The Avid one works the same way, but creates an AAF file instead of an XML file. The Pro Tools one is also going to give you an AAF, but it's going to create audio files and a reference video that you can import into Pro Tools. Now, it's worth noting that it's not going to bake in any audio effects you might have used, like EQ or compression or any of the built-in Resolve effects. The whole point of sending it to Pro Tools is you're going to do an audio mix, so you'd want to start from a clean slate. There is an audio-only option you can use if you want to make an MP3 or a WAV file or something. The Tencent presets are that Chinese streaming platform. I hope I'm saying their name right. And obviously, the Vision Pro presets are for working in that format. There are a ton of settings you can change, and what settings are available are going to depend on what preset you currently have selected. But before you click any of the presets or try to make your own, you've got to understand the 2 most important options in this little section: single clip versus individual clips. Single clip is what 99% of you will use 99% of the time. It does exactly what it sounds like. It takes your entire timeline with all of your cuts, effects, and audio and bakes it into one single video file. Individual clips will export every single clip on your timeline as a separate media file. Now, why would you ever do that? Maybe you're sending all of your clips to a VFX artist. Maybe you're making dailies with different data burned into the footage, like timecode and shot name for an editor to work with. Or perhaps you've graded a video and you need to send the files back to an editor that works in a different program, and they want to be able to tweak cuts here and there. Now, for everyday delivery to a client or to the web, you'll almost always use single clip. Now, as I mentioned, the settings that you can change are going to depend on what preset you've used as a starting point. Now, this video would be hours long if I went through every single possible combination, so I'm going to go through the settings that I think about for the files that I'm creating on a daily basis. Now, there's a lot of information in the user manual that comes with the installation of Resolve, and you can access it here through the help menu. If you have a specific question that I don't end up covering, ask it in the comments, and I will try my best to get you an answer. Right, let's start with the video section. To begin with, you have a tick box to say whether this export will include any video, and then you've got format and codec. Think of the format as the container or wrapper for the file, and the codec as the recipe or method used to compress and store the actual video and audio inside it. The format you select will determine what kind of codecs are available. So for instance, if I select QuickTime, which gives me an MOV file, I have all these different codecs to choose from. So if a client asks for MOV files, they need to give you more information. Should it be H.264, H.265, ProRes, DNxHR? If we stick with H.264 in this example, use hardware acceleration if available controls how Resolve encodes your video. Specifically, whether it uses your computer's GPU or some other dedicated media chip to handle encoding H.264 and H.265 instead of relying on your CPU alone. Only certain hardware supports it, like Macs with Apple Silicon or Windows PCs with NVIDIA or AMD GPUs. If it's available, it is faster, and you will get near identical visual quality to doing it just using the CPU, but with minor compression differences. You probably wouldn't want to use that if you're making a master file for archiving, but to be honest, if that's what I was making, I would probably be using a codec like ProRes, so it wouldn't be available to me anyway. Network optimization is something where, when you enable it, Resolve adjusts how the H.264 file is structured internally to improve playback over networks, especially for streaming or web playback like uploading to YouTube or Vimeo or internal review servers. In simple terms, it moves the metadata header, which is the bit of the file that tells the player how to decode and play that video, to the start of the file instead of the end. Now, if it's disabled, the file needs to fully download before playback can begin. And this is better for local playback or archival files. When it's enabled, the file can start playing immediately as it's being downloaded or streamed. So that's better for uploads, web hosting, and streaming servers. Next, we have resolution and frame rate. This will default to whatever the timeline has set up, but you can change them to something else here. So say you had a 4K timeline, but you want to make a HD 1080 version. You can select it from this drop-down menu. There's one very important thing to remember here. If your timeline is HD, but you change the settings on the Deliver page to something bigger like 4K, Resolve is just upscaling your HD image to 4K. It's not creating extra details. It's the same pixels, just larger. Think of it this way. If your edit timeline is a HD painting, exporting it as 4K doesn't repaint it with more detail. It just prints it on a bigger canvas. Now, this is especially important if you've been working with 4K footage on a HD timeline. Now, when you work that way, Resolve downsamples your footage to HD during your editing and grading. Then if you select 4K on the render page, it upscales that HD version of your material to 4K, doesn't use the original material. If you want to export a 4K file, it's important to have the timeline set to 4K before you go to the Deliver page. If you try to export a file at a higher resolution than your timeline, you're going to get this warning message before it lets you do it. Chapters from markers is only available for QuickTime or MP4 files. It embeds chapter points in the rendered file that match any markers you put on the timeline of that selected marker color. Now we have a really important section starting with quality. You can choose automatic or select a maximum data rate for which to export. As I mentioned before, if I was to use the YouTube preset, I don't have any control over this. If you look at YouTube's recommended settings, they only recommend 8 to 12 megabits per second for a HD video. A megabit is 1000 kilobits if we translate it for Resolve. Now, when I use the Resolve preset, it usually ends up giving me a file of around 10 megabits per second, so that tracks. I want to give it more information for when it creates all its variations. For a typical HD video at 24 to 30 frames a second, you'll likely stop seeing any kind of obvious perceptible improvement in quality somewhere between 20,000 to 40,000 kilobits a second. But the exact number where you hit diminishing returns depends on the specific video content. And what we're talking about here is finding the bitrate where your export is perceptually lossless, where that compressed video is virtually indistinguishable from a high-quality original on your timeline, even if it's not technically lossless. For simple content like a talking head or a landscape that doesn't move very much, you might achieve this at the lower end, around 15,000 to 20,000. For complex high-motion content like action scenes, sports, or gaming footage with fast cuts, you'll want a higher bitrate to avoid motion artifacts. This is where you're going to be pushing towards 30,000 to 40,000. Now, for a standard 8-bit H.264 file, setting your bitrate higher than 40 to 50,000 is almost certainly overkill. The file size is going to get dramatically bigger with no visible benefit. So experiment a little here and see how high you need to push that number for your material to avoid any compression artifacts. For most of the documentary work we do here, 25 to 30,000 is usually where we land for a HD video. If you're doing a 4K export, you'll probably stop seeing improvements somewhere between 60,000 and 90,000. But again, you're going to want to experiment here. If you want a high quality master file for archiving or for further editing, H.264 is not the ideal choice. You should probably export a ProRes 422 or DNxHR HQ. These files are going to be much larger, but they're designed to be edited and re-encoded with minimal quality loss. If the H.264 files you're creating are coming out with file sizes that are just too big, if your final destination allows it, try using H.265 instead. It's a more efficient and newer codec, and you can get away with lower bit rates that will still give you a good quality file. It can be harder to play back on older equipment though. Entropy mode lets you choose the compression algorithm that the encoder uses. CABAC gives you better results, but it's a little harder for really old machines to play back. Honestly, it's 2025. Unless it's going to get played back on a smart toaster, just pick this unless you've been told otherwise. Next, we've got a drop down that lets you choose between different encoding profiles, and they're optimized for different purposes. If you're exporting H.264, your options are going to be auto, base, main, and high. Auto automatically selects an encoding profile, and Resolve is pretty smart at picking the most appropriate one. Base is super compressed, so I wouldn't use this in this day and age. Main is for SD analog transmission. High is for Blu-ray and HD transmission. I would leave it on auto or high, but see which one gives you better results. If I switch to H.265, you'll see different options of main, main 10, and main 42210. Main is for 420 8-bit video, main 10 is for 420 10-bit video, and main 42210, as you might have guessed, is for 422 10-bit video. Now, if you don't know what any of these numbers mean, it's a bit outside the scope of this video, but let me know in the comments if that's something you want to learn more about. Then you have a multi-pass encode option. You can choose between single and multi-pass encoding, depending on if you tick this box or not. Single pass is faster, but multi-pass yields better results when quality is important. Now, the difference might not be super obvious, so if speed is important, you can probably get away with not using this if your video doesn't have any super complex motion going on. Next up, we've got keyframes and frame reordering. Now, these affect how you create different frames of your video when you're compressing it. Now, if you haven't already watched it, you should go and look at my video about working with proxy files, and I'm going to link to that below, because I go into a ton of detail about how this kind of thing works. It's kind of hard to give a super basic explanation of it, so stick with me. In video compression, not every frame is a complete picture. To save space, the encoder uses 3 different types of frames. You want an iframe, and this is a full, complete image. It doesn't need any other frames to be displayed. This is that keyframe you're setting. Then you've got a P frame, or predicted frame. This is a partial frame that only stores the changes from the previous frame, so there's less data than an iframe. Then you have a B frame, meaning bidirectional, and this is the most complex. It's a partial frame that looks at the frame before it and the frame after it, and then just saves the details of those changes. Now, it's typically the smallest type of frame. A sequence of frames between 2 iframes is called a GOP, or a group of pictures. When you choose automatic, you let the encoder use its own intelligence. It's going to place a keyframe, as in an iframe, at the start of a group of pictures, and then it inserts new keyframes whenever it detects that there's a major scene change. Now, this is good because if you've got a 10-second static shot, it doesn't need very many keyframes. If you've got rapid-fire montage, it's going to need a lot of them. Automatic is going to put keyframes exactly where they're needed to maintain quality. If you don't pick automatic, this is going to force the encoder to insert a keyframe at a fixed interval no matter what. So for example, if you set it to 24 on a 24 frames per second timeline, you're forcing a new frame every second. Now, I guess there might still be some old playback devices or streaming platforms, especially for live streaming, that require a fixed keyframe interval for compatibility. So if that's in your delivery specs, I guess use it, but avoid it if you can because it's really inefficient. It could force a keyframe in the middle of a slow static shot, which is just wasting data, or not place one during a fast cut, which can cause kind of a blocky mess. So as a general rule, always set keyframes to automatic unless you're exporting for a specific platform that explicitly tells you to set a fixed interval. So what does a frame reordering checkbox do? This allows the encoder to use B-frames. This is massively more efficient. Using B-frames will give you a significantly higher quality video at the same bitrate, or the same quality at a much smaller file size. It's slightly more complex to encode and decode, and in the past, some very old devices couldn't handle it. Now, this is almost never a problem today. Some users have also reported that disabling this can sometimes fix weird rendering artifacts in fades or cross dissolves, but this is a troubleshooting step, not a best practice. So honestly, like the keyframe option, just leave it on unless the place you're delivering to says otherwise. All right, hopefully you're still with me. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, but once you figure these things out once, you can just create a preset and then not worry about it again. Now, with that said, I'm going to leave a link to a couple of free YouTube presets you can use for HD and 4K exports. Use them as is, or as a jumping off point to create your own custom ones. They'll be in the description below. Now, onto the advanced settings. Pixel aspect ratio lets you change how your video's pixels are shaped. You can pick square or cinemascope. This setting overrides what you set up in your project settings. Square is almost certainly what you want here. Data levels is set to auto by default. This means your video will use the right brightness range for whatever format you picked. This is usually what you want. If you choose video or full instead, all of your clips will use that specific brightness range no matter what. Retain sub-black and super white data lets you keep extra bright and extra dark parts of your video. Sometimes your footage has levels that go beyond normal limits, brighter than white or darker than black. Turning this on saves those extreme values if your video format allows it. If you leave it off, Resolve will cut off anything outside the normal range. This helps make sure your final video meets QC standards. Color space tag and gamma tag tie into color management, and they affect something called the NCLC tag, which tells video players how to interpret the color and brightness of your file. Now, there have been some major changes recently in how Resolve deals with color management, particularly if you're working on a Mac. So I've been reluctant to make a video about it in case it changes again. I'm going to link to a video by fellow Resolve trainer Chadwick over at Creative Video Tips that does a really good job of explaining the current state of things. If you're uploading to YouTube, it's going to expect your files to be tagged as 111, and setting both of those to Rec 709 will get you that. But you do want to make sure your monitor is calibrated and your color management is set up correctly. So watch Chadwick's video, feel free to ask me any follow-up questions here in the comments, and maybe, if I'm feeling brave, one day I'll make a video about it. The data burn-in option refers to the data burn-in settings in the workspace menu. If you've got that turned on to show something like file names or timecode on screen, you can use this option to burn that information into the exported image, which might be useful for a rough draft if the viewer needs that information while they're watching it. Bypass re-encode when possible lets you do a direct copy of the footage in the timeline, directly from the source media to the file you're exporting, when the selected format, codec, and type of export matches the source. Now, this option skips reprocessing your video, keeps it looking great, and makes everything much faster. But it only works if you haven't added any extra effects to your clips. If you do any color grading, add Resolve effects plugins, layer effects on top of each other, combine multiple clips together, resize or stabilize your footage, change your timeline's output size, or add fusion effects, the entire clip will need to be reprocessed. Transitions are different. They only need to be processed for the short time that the transition lasts, not for the whole clip. Then we have Use Optimized Media. As the name suggests, when you check this box, if you created optimized media files, Resolve is going to use those optimized media files to make the final video. Now, this works great if your optimized media is the same quality or better than what you're creating. But if your optimized media is lower quality than your final video, turn this box off. This forces Resolve to use your original files, which will give you the best possible quality. The same goes for Use Proxy Media. Where this can come in handy is if you're editing only using proxy files and you need to export out a draft. The same also goes for Use Render Cached Images. If your cached files are the same quality or better than what you're creating, this is handy. But if your cached files are lower quality than your final video, turn this box off. You've got force sizing to highest quality. Now, if you've been using the bilinear setting to make your computer run faster while editing, turn this box on. It's going to automatically switch to the sharper filter setting when creating your final video. This will make your resized clips look better. If your timeline includes RAW footage, turn on Force Debayer to higher quality. Some RAW camera files let you lower the processing quality to make your computer work faster while you edit. Turning this box on will make sure your final video always uses the highest quality possible. For render or video tracks, if you're rendering single clips, you can uncheck this box and pick specific tracks from the Disable menu. This lets you leave certain tracks out of the final video for each job. Then you've got Enable Flat Pass. This option's got 3 choices to control whether your color grading gets applied to each clip. Off includes your color grading when creating the final video. With clip settings, checks each version of a clip to see if its flat pass flag is turned on. If it is, that version renders without color grading. If not, it includes the grading. You can turn this flag on or off for each version by right-clicking a clip on the color page, choosing the version you want, and selecting Enable Flat Pass. For the setting Always On, Resolve moves all color grading from every clip in the final video. Next, we have Disable Sizing and Blanking Output. When this is turned off, things like letterboxing, black bars on the top and bottom, or pillar boxing, black bars on the side, get permanently added to your video. Any size changes you made on the cut, edit, or color pages also get locked in, including image stabilization. When this is turned on, all those size changes and black bars are disabled. Your video is created either at the original size, if you picked render at source resolution for individual clips, or at your timeline or project size. The Trigger Script at option lets you trigger a script when a render starts or finishes. I don't know how to write scripts, so I've never ticked this box. In theory, you could have it do things like play a chime when the export is done, which is something I miss from After Effects, or email you a notification when it's finished exporting. There's all sorts of cool use cases. Finally, we have the subtitle settings. If you've got subtitles on your timeline, you can export them while you're exporting your video. As a separate file, lets you pick from a few different standards. If you're exporting for YouTube, Facebook, places like that, pick SRT without formatting so it doesn't add in a bunch of code that's going to show up in the captions. If you've been asked to embed the subtitles into your file and the format supports it, you've got a couple of options for those. Burn into video will treat them like a graphic file, and they'll show up on top of the image just like you see them in the viewer, with whatever font, sizing, and styling that you've used. If you are finding this video helpful, please do hit that like button. It really does help the video get suggested to other people that might need it, and it would mean the world to me as well. Okay, now the next two sections are significantly shorter than the video one, so I'm going to whip through those as quickly as I can, and then we'll move on to presets and other workflow hacks. Here in the audio section, the codec dropdown will have different options depending on the preset you selected earlier, which will in turn change the options you've got underneath. What you choose here will depend on your delivery specs. For codecs like AAC or MP3, you've got an option for bitrate strategy that might look a little bit confusing at first. You've got constant bitrate or CBR. This forces the encoder to use the exact same amount of data for every second of audio, regardless of how complex it is. So if you set it to 320 kilobits a second, it will use that for a complex musical section or for a section of pure silence. It means you can calculate the final file size perfectly in advance if you need to. It's got high compatibility because it's the oldest, most basic method, and it should work on all devices. It is pretty inefficient because it wastes data on simple or silent parts. Plus, if you don't have it set very high, it might not provide enough data for very complex parts, which can slightly reduce the quality. Variable bitrate or VBR is the smartest mode. Instead of targeting a specific bitrate, you target a quality level. The encoder will then variably assign data, using a very low bitrate for simple or silent parts and a very high bitrate for complex parts. It delivers the most quality for the smallest possible file size, and it's highly efficient. The final file size depends entirely on how complex the audio is. In Resolve, this option doesn't let you set a bitrate, only a quality level. Average bitrate or ABR is a hybrid. You set a target average and the encoder will then vary the bitrate, going higher for complex parts and lower for simple parts. But it will constantly adjust to make sure the overall average for the entire file hits the target. The final file will be almost exactly the size you'd expect from that average rate. It's slightly less efficient than true VBR because it might have to starve a complex section of data at the end to meet its average target if it was too generous at the beginning. Variable bitrate constrained, VBRC, is another hybrid, and it's a safer version of VBR. It's a compromise between ABR and VBR. You set a bitrate, and the encoder treats this as a minimum or the floor for the average. It will try and hit your target, but it's got permission to exceed it if the audio is very complex and otherwise would sound bad. It's designed to prevent quality from dropping, even if it means the file size grows slightly larger than you'd planned. For YouTube, you honestly can't go wrong with constant bitrate or CBR at 320 kilobits a second. Compared to the video part of your export, audio is pretty tiny. 320 is the highest quality setting for AAC or MP3, it's universally compatible, and YouTube will be happy with it. For sample rate, 48,000 or 48K is the standard for video. 44.1K is the standard for music. If your project is set up to work at 48K, but you export at 44.1, the software is going to have to resample the audio to make it fit. This can technically degrade the audio quality, but more importantly, it can cause sync issues and playback errors. For any video workflow, stick with 48K from start to finish. You would almost never use 96K for a final video export, but you might use it during the production phase for specific high-end audio work. I have never been asked to supply an export at anything other than 48K, so that's a safe bet to set and forget. The next couple of options are ones I've never used, and unless you're doing surround sound mixes, you'll likely never use them either. Render one track per channel lets you save each audio channel as its own separate track in your exported file. You can set up multi-channel formats like stereo or 5.1 surround sound, or you can save them as individual mono files. Render as discrete audio tracks is similar. It also saves one channel per track, but these tracks don't include any information about where the sound should come from. They also don't group together as multi-channel clips, like stereo or 5.1. So if you export a mono file with render one track per channel, it comes in positioned front and center. But if you export the same file as a discrete audio track, it's got no built-in position information at all. This output track section is going to require a hop over to Fairlight. If I open up the mixer, the channel strip on the end is your main output bus, and all of the other audio tracks are pointing to it, as you can see on the bus output section of all of these tracks. Every timeline will have at least one bus, otherwise you wouldn't be able to hear anything. Now you can have as many different buses as you want within reason, and you can choose to send one, several, or all of your audio tracks to it. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how we use that and how it ties into the options on the deliver page. Now, one common deliverable you might get asked for is something called an M&E mix, which stands for music and effects. I've also heard it called a mix minus. The idea is that you make a version where you remove all of the dialogue so it can be dubbed over in a foreign language. In the Fairlight menu, we'll select bus format. From here, you can add as many buses as you need and set their format. I'm going to add a second stereo bus, and I'll rename them to be full mix and M&E. I'll also give this second one a different color. Now back at the mixer, for all the tracks that don't have talking on, so that's everything but the first two tracks in this timeline, I'll add a second output. You can monitor the different buses using this little drop-down menu. As I switch between, the only difference is one will have talking and one won't.
My name is Chris Lang, and I'm the founder of Oregon Mountain Outfitters. We are located in our store That's because it's so unique.
Now, back on the Deliver page, I can select which of the buses I want to include, or I can include both on the same file if that's what the client wants. Another thing we do is make what we call a clean version of the video. This is so that if we want to be able to use a section of this edit later in another video, rather than importing the timeline and all of the associated media, we can import one file that will have no on-screen graphics and separate audio tracks. Over on the edit page, I'm going to duplicate the timeline, add a suffix of clean at the end, and open it up. I'll disable any captions, graphics like logos, lower thirds, anything that's interacting with the footage. The other thing I'm going to do is remove all of the volume changes in the music. If I want to make a shorter version of this video at a later date, I don't want those volume changes burned into the final output because I'll likely want to put them in a different part of the song. Now let's head over to Fairlight again, and under that same menu, we're going to add some buses. You can split this up any way you need to. In this case, I'll make the first one a mono track since it's just talking, and then I'm going to add two stereo ones. I'll name them DX for dialogue, SFX for ambience and any other audio, and a third called MX for music. Now in my mixer, I'll assign all the tracks to their appropriate bus. Back on the Deliver page, I'm going to select a ProRes preset since this is for archival purposes. In the audio section, I'll make it have 3 different outputs, and I'll make sure each one of the 3 buses is assigned. Now if I were to export that and bring it into another project, the audio tracks will be separated out, and I can make any edits I want. In the audio normalization section, you can select loudness standard presets you want to aim for, and it will automatically adjust the mix to try and hit them. Unchecking this box will export your file with the mix sounding exactly as it does on your timeline. Now, this is another one of those topics that really needs a video of its own, but very basically, you need to think about audio in terms of volume, a specific part of the video, and loudness, which you can think of as the average volume of your video over time. You might have loud parts and quiet parts, and the loudness is the average of all of those combined. I'll come back to the difference between normalize and optimize here in a sec. If you use Sample Peak Program, you'll be giving it an average loudness to aim for, and it will turn your mix up or down to get to it. If you use True Peak, you'll give it a number and essentially say, don't let any part of the mix go above that. That means if you've got a quiet mix with one loud part that's louder than that number, it's going to turn the whole thing down so that loud part doesn't go above it. These next two are algorithms made by the International Telecommunication Union, the ITU, for measuring loudness. 1770-4 is a later, more refined version of the algorithm. It's the current engine used by most modern loudness meters. You would pick your targets, and it will try to adjust your levels to match. All the rest are standards for different broadcast locations, which I'll list on screen, and streaming services. When you pick one of those, it will set the targets and use the ITU algorithms to measure and adjust your audio. Now let's hop back up to the methods Resolve is going to use. Normalize to standard is going to uniformly turn the volume of your entire mix up or down to try and fit the standard you chose until one of the targets is met, and then it will stop. So for instance, if the overall mix is quiet, it will start turning it up. If there's a loud moment that would exceed that target level, it's going to stop, even if the loudness is below the target you're aiming for. Optimize to standard is going to try and ride the volume of the mix up and down throughout to try and get your mix to meet both of those targets. Now, that sounds good in theory, but it could really change your mix. If you've got a part that's supposed to be quiet, you could find it turning that part up to better match the loudness standard, despite you being very intentional that that's supposed to be quiet. In my opinion, you should be watching the loudness meters in Fairlight and get your mix as close as you can to the standard you're trying to match before you go to the Deliver page, and then just use the Normalize to Standard option to make a slight tweak to the export. Finally, you've got a tick box to pick which output to apply normalization to. So if you've got multiple audio outputs, you can pick if some, all, or none are going to be affected. There are a few more important options to look at in the file section. You can choose whether you want the export to have the same name as the timeline or a custom name. If you select custom, you'll get an option to write whatever you want and also add a suffix to the end of the name. Now, this is a good time to point out that if you type in the percentage sign right here, you can select from a crazy long list of metadata. One that I use all the time is actually timeline name, because this way I can add a suffix to the end. So maybe I'm making a preset with the subtitles burned in. I could change this to something like percentage sign, timeline name, underscore sub. And then anytime I use that preset, it will burn the subtitles in and add underscore sub to the file name. You've also got an option for adding a subfolder within the location you've selected. That can be handy if you've got lots of exports for the same project and you want to keep things organized. Use digits in file name comes into play if you're rendering an image sequence rather than a video file. 8 is the default, but you can set that to whatever standard you're aiming to match. The each clip starts at frame thing can be used if you're exporting individual clips instead of one long file. It's sometimes used in workflows where you're sending clips out to VFX work, but it's not an option I've ever used. The same goes for render without timecode. Now, there's nothing about that in the manual, but there is a tooltip that says enable this option when uploading to streaming services from a mobile device. Again, I have never used that even once. Start timeline timecode at is useful if you want your export to have a different timecode than your timeline. You could use it in a situation where you've got multiple short videos on one timeline that you're exporting out one segment at a time, and you want them all to have the same timecode at the start. I just use separate timelines for this, but it's good to know it's an option. The render speed menu lets you control how fast DaVinci Resolve creates your video. Now, normally you'll set this to maximum, but sometimes there's a problem where multiple edit suites are using the same storage system. And if too many people try to use it at once, there isn't enough bandwidth to go around. Now, Resolve works so fast that it can cause some playback problems for other people using the same storage at the same time. If this happens, you can slow down the render speed. This leaves more storage speed available for other people. Then you've got some information about how much of the target hard drive space is already used and how much will be left when you're done exporting your video. You can add extra outputs under the 3-dot menu here so that you export out multiple versions of the same timeline at once rather than one at a time. You'll see numbers appear right here, and from there you can pick a new format and codec, and whether you want to use any data burn-in, and well, that's it. I never use this option because you don't have any of the normal controls. If I pick something like H.265, I've got no idea what any of the settings for things like bitrate or audio are. I don't really understand why it works this way, but I wanted you to know it's there. If you're working on a small monitor and you want a little bit more real estate to preview your work, press this clips button and all the individual thumbnails will go away. You can also turn off this little timecode bar or any marker overlays in the 3-dot menu on the top right of the viewer. You can drag between the viewer and the timeline to resize them, and that's about the extent of customization you've got here. The timeline is also where you can tell Resolve if you want to export the whole timeline or just a section that you specify with in and out points. If you already marked in and out points on the edit page, they're going to show up here. Once you've got your export settings all set up, hit this Add to Render Queue button, and it will appear over on the right-hand side. You can set up multiple different exports, and then you've got the choice to either select one or several and render those, or select nothing and it's going to render the whole queue in the order that they're shown on the list. If you want to change the order, you can grab them and drag them around. If you want to rename the job, just click on the name and type in whatever you want. There are a few options worth knowing about in this 3-dot menu. If you select Show All Projects, you'll see everything in every render queue in the library you're currently working with. Now, this is handy because if you need to export timelines from several different projects, you could add them all to their respective render queues within their projects, and then you can have them all show up in this one spot. That way, you could render jobs from all the different projects in one go without having to switch between them. Very handy if you want to do a batch of exports overnight. You can clear all jobs that have already been rendered from the queue, or you can clear absolutely everything from the queue. You'll also see Show Job Details. This just adds a little bit more information underneath each job. The Review Before Upload option is for when you're using one of those presets that automatically uploads your export to a platform like YouTube or Dropbox or TikTok. That way you can check your work before it gets sent off. If you added something to the queue and then you remembered a setting you wanted to change, like say you forgot to choose to export your captions, click this little pencil icon and it's going to reload it in the render settings panel. Make your tweaks and then click Update Job here at the bottom. Once a render is complete, you can right click on it and you'll see a couple of options. Reveal in Media Storage will open up the media page and show you where it lives in your hard drive. Reveal in Finder will open up a Finder window showing you your exported file. Clear Render Status is a handy one. Say you export out a video and then you notice you made a typo. You could go back to the timeline, fix it there, and then you can clear the render status and just run that export again without having to set it up. Okay, so once you've got your settings exactly as you want them and you know you're going to use them again, it's time to set up a preset. Click the 3-dot menu and choose Save as New Preset. In the pop-up, give it a name and assign an icon to it. Also, be sure to click this Add to Quick Export tick box and then click Save. That preset and any other ones you've set up for this library will now show up at the beginning of the list. Back under that 3-dot menu, you've got options to make changes to the preset, edit the name, export it for use in another library or on another computer, or delete it. The Quick Export option is available on the top right of the UI on the Cut, Edit, and Color pages. Just select the preset you want to use and a location for the export, and you can get it going without ever touching the Deliver page. Now, if you've managed to keep watching this long, you get one more little power tip. On the Edit page, if you've got several timelines you want to export, select them all, right-click one of them, then go to Timelines, Add to Render Queue Using, and from there you can select your preset and add them all to the render queue in one move. And now I've got a question for you. What other part of DaVinci Resolve confuses you the most? Let me know in the comments, and it might just be my next video. Now, while you're down there, be sure to give this video a like to help other people find it, and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more Resolve tips and tricks like these. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.